Yeah, we'll do some tests because we've got like 15 minutes until we start. So.
Very sensible cover of your phone. I could have that cover, I think it'd be great. I don't cover some women definitely have different. You realize that phone covers for men? We're quite good. That's what I felt. Yeah, come round here, you don't mind if I don't get up. I'm bloody knackered. We are. That's okay. It's a lovely that went for it. People out here. Thank you. Nice to see you. That's good, thank you. Sure, yeah.
It's the other side.
Glasses, no glasses, you know. A big tumbler full of white wine.
Anything else you like? Anything else you like?
Sorry.
I will let you go.
Okay, I'm going to nip across without touching your wires.
Oh, this find it. If I didn't feel like but anyway, come join. You'll find out.
Hi there. Nice to see you. Wonder why. Could be dangerous.
Maria, do you mind popping down here? That's okay. And the only person I can find out, my boss, the only person who lives here is yeah. Just one more. I have really good stuff. Never listen to
So they're actually live streamed, so you can catch them on our Twitter and Facebook and YouTube pages. However, yesterday, sorry, yes, and normally 10 to 9 o'clock, and absolutely fine, but today it's connected with the Wi-Fi everybody else is connected with, so we just have a few issues, so we're going to record it as well and upload it later this evening.
So, but not all of them are
When they're live streamed, it's automatically recorded, so they're still on the archives on the YouTube channel. Yes, we did, yeah, we should go and put in the prison reform, yeah. I think that should be on our YouTube channel. Yes, that should be on our YouTube Yes. Yes, so here it is. My video is restoring control. Sorry. So in regards to YouTube. It seems a lot of things just happening CSJ, so the best typing in social justice. The more people using it, so you know how I feel. Finally, somewhere. Well, okay. And then the Yeah, exactly. It's a training camp. Yes, literally scan by yeah, look it up, yeah.
Can I move in?
Yeah, of course you can.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry.
That's the only thing about it, somehow.
Yeah, what do you
Someone's sitting there.
One they quoted about King. It's about King not being able to
Completely the opposite.
They work very on the bench being judged. She was a
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll kick off. Order. Hello, welcome to Exchange One. My name is Patrick Spencer. I'm the head of work and welfare here at the CSJ. I was going to say here at the CSJ in London. Today we're going to be talking about unemployment. 1.3 million people will wake up tomorrow morning without a job, but wanting a job. Why is that a problem? Because, as we say in the CSJ, work is the best route out of poverty. We have four panellists today, four esteemed panellists, who know a thing or two about jobs, the economy, and employment. On my right, we have Professor Syed Kamal, previously an MEP, but now Director of Research at the Institute for Economic Affairs. To the left of him, Maria Neofitu, who is Director of Public Affairs at Impetus, previously at Absolute Return for Kids. To my left, rarely on the left of anything, Tim Martin, founder of FTSE 250 company Wetherspoons, which, by the way, is 40,000 people up and down the UK. So I think it's really important to get that's very important. And then, of course, also on my left, a man who needs no introduction, Right Honourable Ian Douglas Smith, the MP for Chingford and Woodford Green. I'm going to call on each of the panellists to give a little overview, a 5-minute start on the subject. But before I do that, I'm going to just give you a few stats that I think are important, some context to this debate. As I said before, there are 1.3 million people in the UK who are looking for work. Being unemployed increases the risk of someone being in poverty by a factor of 4. Unemployment is linked to worse mental and physical health outcomes. Unemployment is linked to a shorter life expectancy. Worklessness in a household is linked to children failing in education. Unemployment, in short, has huge personal and social costs. So, who are the 1.3 million people who are unemployed in Britain today? 60% of the unemployed population have been unemployed for a short period of time, less than 6 months. Less than a quarter of people who are unemployed have been so for more than 12 months. They're more likely to be men and more likely to be young. 55% of unemployed people in the UK are male. More than a third of those unemployed males are under the age of 24. The number of workless households has fallen significantly. The number of people who have been unemployed for a long period of time has collapsed, by the way, something I want to talk about a lot more, partially because of the work that Ian has done in government. Where are the 1.3 million? The 4 highest rates of unemployment in the UK are in the North East, Yorkshire, the East Midlands and the West Midlands. The North East has a disproportionately high level of long-term unemployment. Towns like Middlesbrough and Hartlepool have claimant count rates twice the rate of the UK national average. Impetus research found that a disadvantaged person in the North East was 50% more likely to be a NEET, not in education, employment or training, than a disadvantaged person in London. And our own research showed that in Birmingham, there are more people claiming unemployment benefits in Birmingham than there are in Manchester, Leeds and Liverpool combined. Finally, we know that disability is one of the biggest drivers of unemployment in this country. It's something we desperately need to address. So that's the CSJ point of view. I'm now going to ask the panel to say a few words. Can I kick off with Professor Knall? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the CSJ for inviting me to be part of this, and for working with the CSJ for many years. One thing I thought was important to know when we put this in context was what Patrick said about people being unemployed for a short time. Because sometimes, as my colleague Len Shackleton has written, sometimes people assume when you look at job stats that there's a sort of fixed stock of jobs that you either add to it or you delete from it, as it were. And actually what tends to happen is that when employment grows, it tends to be that you're creating more jobs than are lost. There are jobs being churned all the time. So for example, there was a stat a couple of years ago where 2.5 million private sector jobs have been lost, but actually 2.67 new private sector jobs have been created. So people would think that was 0.17 million jobs added to an existing stock, but it shows that there are jobs being churned all the time, and I think that reflects the 60%. But even though I said that stat, it doesn't mean that there's a problem, as Patrick's laid out. We know there's a problem. I know Ian, when he was at DWP, and as Chris Reagan was looking at ideas of how you get that long-term unemployed back to work. And I would say some very simple things, from my own perspective as an ex-politician, used to talk to organisations and work with the CSJ on this. The first thing is ask employers and employees themselves, but ask them the right questions. So ask employers, and hopefully Tim will come in on this as well, what would encourage you to employ an extra person? And it could be the tax system, for example. I know it's very difficult if you're a small company to go from a business owner to an employer. There's sort of the ladder you have to climb, that gap itself. But also, for example, I remember speaking to a company a few years ago who told me that there just wasn't enough engineering people coming through. Now, I did engineering as my first degree in the 80s. Even then, we were talking about not enough engineers and a shortage of engineers. And we've had Conservative governments and Labour governments, and no one's done anything about that. That shortage is still there. So I think to companies quite often, what is the problem? Who are the engineers? And why are you not doing more? Don't rely on government. You could be doing more as employers. Does that mean going deeper into the system, deeper into the education system? Or does it mean actually training your own people independently from the system? Sort of variation of either apprenticeships or even perhaps short courses. Do you need to take them through sort of long-term courses? And you can think, for example, there are now projects around. There's a coding project in London that offers courses for 6 weeks. And after 6 weeks, most people in that course get a job in coding. And they tell me that the industry changes so quickly, even from one 6-week course to another 6-week course, they have to change the curriculum. And they say, why are people still doing 3 years computer science degrees? So I think we have to think about some of that in direct response to employers. The employers feed directly into that course. I think also we've got to be more forgiving. There are lots of people out there, through no fault of their own, who've made mistakes in life. How do we do more about getting ex-convicts into the workforce? How do we do more about getting the homeless actually prepared for even turn up for a job interview? And there are some superb charities out there doing that, and we need to encourage more of that. And also talking to further education sector. The thing about the further education sector is that sadly there's still too many people in this country who only have one chance. And if they're unlucky enough to go to a bad school, that's it. The great thing about the further education sector is that it gives them a second and third chance, third or even fourth chance. And on top of that, we have some odd things with further education. That they set up, say, a mock hairdressing salon and then train people, but actually there are hairdressing salons along the road which are empty at night. We have more partnerships between existing facilities rather than building new facilities, and actually think about that partnership. Maybe those companies themselves are looking for people, and is there a better use of facilities in that way? The second thing I'd say is the attitude. I remember when I used to teach MBA students, and quite often my first lecture to them, I'd say, why are you doing an MBA? And if it was to start a new business, I would say actually CDA matters more than MBA. And I say, what CDA? Can do attitude. And actually, it's the attitude. And one of the things I remember, I was working with a local charity that it was set up by a chap who had a chain of gyms, and he said to me, I don't actually need people with qualifications to work in my gym behind a desk, for example. You know, we've had great inflation. What I need is attitude. I need people to turn up on time. I need them to be clean. I need them to smile. I need them to not say, computer says no. And what happens is that it's very simple, he says, it sounds, but sadly there are still too many people who aren't brought up or don't understand how important these things are. And I think we need to look at some of those charities and organisations do that. The problem with this particular charity, what happened was, and I think this is another flaw we have in the system, is because there was government money available, he decided to go after the government money and effectively became an agency, a state agency. When that money didn't come through anymore, the project collapsed. And actually would have been far better had he stayed as a sort of private charity or non-state charity and helped more, less people in the shorter term, but more over the longer term. And I think we have to look at that. The third thing I'd say is look in our local communities. You will know from the CSJ, and the Asia Airlines, some wonderful local community projects which are tackling some of these issues, helping former gang members become entrepreneurs, helping other people into work. And let's not assume that government has all the solutions. How can we help local community charities and local projects like that? I mean, I know the Jobs Club who help local people who were being turned away by the local job centre and got 100 people into work. And, you know, not particularly fantastic jobs, but got them into employment. Things we've got to look at is when we think of housing estates and social housing estates, we often think about them as hubs of crime. But actually, they are hubs of enterprise. There are lots of people there creating businesses, starting businesses. Some of them are legal, some of them are the informal economy, but they have entrepreneurial skills. And how do we tap into that? How do we help those people and get them into the formal economy? There's some wonderful charities and projects doing that. And I think government has to be humble enough to know that it doesn't always have the answers. It should create the space for more of those charities and also help them to be replicated elsewhere. I'll stop that. We'll stop those opening thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kamal. Short-term courses and forgiveness. I didn't disagree with a thing you said. Dr. Maria Neophyte, that's you.
Thank you. So I'm really delighted that Impetus, together with our partners, the Centre for Social Justice, is supporting today's event and that we've chosen to focus on the forgotten few. Our main message today is one that will be familiar. As a Conservative leader told a Labour one, it's important to fix the roof while the sun is shining. So yes, employment is at record levels, but youth unemployment is down. It's almost half what it was at its peak during the last recession. But we should still be concerned about the 800,000 or so young people who are not working, not in educational training, the so-called NEETs. So rather than forget them in the triumphalism around our record employment levels, now is the time to focus on those furthest away from the labour market. And there are three good reasons why. Firstly, there's the simple economic reality that at a time of nearly full employment, there are skills shortages in the economy. So there just aren't the available workers to support the growth of British business, and that's the growth we need to be able to reduce our debts and to support our public services. Of course, we could import skills from abroad, and sometimes it's easier and cheaper to do that than training people ourselves, but that is a criminal waste of our own talent. Impetus focuses on young people under the age of 25, and we've been doing some research using newly available government data to help us better understand youth unemployment. And one of the things we found as part of our Youth Jobs Gap series is that half of the people who aren't in work or education left compulsory education at 18 without their 5 GCSEs, which is the minimum that you need to succeed in an increasingly high wage economy. We can't afford to ignore these young people, and that's the economic imperative. There's also, of course, a social justice imperative, and that's the second reason why we need a greater focus on the forgotten few. This is surely fertile territory for the Conservative Party, marrying both the economic and social justice imperatives. And our Youth Jobs Gap research has found that disadvantaged young people, so those young people who are on free school meals at school, are twice as likely to be neat than their better off peers. Work should be a route out of poverty for these young people, But not only are they not getting the qualifications they need to succeed in the labour market, even those that do are still falling further behind than their better off peers. What's worse is that too often unemployment doesn't mean between jobs. Even in an environment where businesses are increasingly crying out for new talent, too many young people spend too long outside of the labour market. So today we're releasing our 6th report, and you'll find it on your seats. And the headline finding of that report is that young people who are NEET for 3 months, 75% of that group are NEET for a year or more. So we say in the report that neatness is sticky, or in simpler terms, if you reach 3 months NEET, the likelihood is that you stay NEET. This is a major problem for our society and our economy, and it's a symptom of a deep social injustice. Young people from disadvantaged backgrounds are disproportionately likely to end up stuck in a NEET trap. The existing research, which Patrick talked about in his remarks, shows that long periods of unemployment early in life have long-term scarring effects. They reduce young people's health and wealth outcomes many decades later. So the third reason why we should focus on the forgotten few is that if we don't act quickly to support young people into work, the state will likely end up supporting them for much, much longer. I know the CSJ is all about breaking intergenerational cycles, and the early 20s are a key window for doing so. If we get this right, we can set young people on the right path for life. If we get it wrong, the cycle perpetuates. So on this policy issue, the stars are perfectly aligned with the needs of the economy and the needs of our young people pointing in the right direction. At some point, inevitably, there's going to be another recession, and when a recession comes, the opportunity to help these young people passes. Unemployment rises, and the focus moves on to supporting much larger numbers of people in an environment where firms can take their pick of available workers. So that's why you have to fix the roof while the sun shines. The people who can't get jobs now, in the good times, won't get a look at when the times are tougher. Supporting them is a now or never issue.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, everyone, indeed. It's a very, very interesting topic. I think the main thing that people can identify with from their own lives is that work is good. And that if you don't work, and we're all a bit like that, it's difficult to get going, and you decline mentally, become lethargic, etc., etc. And work of any type is brilliant. For my sins, I do an hour of French a week, and my French teacher, who's had the same job since 1972, said that France isn't very good at creating small jobs. It's very good at creating big jobs, but it's regulating small jobs out of the economy. And I think it's a very important factor. Our company, it's pejorative to call them small jobs. A lot of people think they are. Actually, they're very complex jobs. But you can get a start in life even with no qualifications working in a pub. So we employ 40,000 people, as has been said. We believe it or not, we pay 1,000th of all UK tax between our customers and our employees and ourselves with VAT, alcohol duties, climate change levies, etc. So you're getting people started in jobs, which is what I see a lot. I see people who even some of them are quite highly educated, but for some reason they couldn't get a job at Procter & Gamble. And if they sit at home, which is implicit in what's being said here, they go into recline, they come and work for us, and they get energized. And I think we're all a bit like that. But yeah, so we pay 750 million of taxes a year, £800,000 per pub, £16,000 per week of taxes of one type or another. So that's why you have to create jobs. I think one of the biggest creator of jobs, which does link into my main hobby horse, but I think it's real, it's not an artificial link, is democracy. If you look around the world, the greatest generators of jobs are democratic countries, and North America has been a phenomenal generator of jobs taxes, wealth. Poor old South America, which hasn't been as democratic, has struggled in so many ways. So one of the first things you've got to do is be wary of doing things which reduce democracy, and that links into my own view and Ian's view and others' view of the effects of Brexit, which is reducing democracy and creating a lot of employment problems beyond the UK, because they're more highly regulated economies, etc. I'll give you a couple of examples for us. Strangely enough, looking back on Wetherspoons, I try to think, how come we went from 150,000 sales in 1980 to 1.8 billion in the year that's just finished. And I think one of the factors was that in the 1980s, the government at the time took away rent controls. And what we were doing is we were opening new pubs, but unlike pubs which existed most historically, we didn't have any upstairs. We just took over a shop or a bank, and we didn't have any, so we had to rent property for our managers. A lot of our managers came from Newcastle or Belfast, wherever the heck it might be. And the fact of removing rent controls meant there was a stock of rented property we could rent on behalf of our staff. So it may seem a remote connection, but that better regulation helped us very much. The other thing was it was thought to be impossible in the 70s to get planning permission for a new pub. So most of the pubs that existed in the UK were the ones that were there when the area was built, whenever that was. And we were able to, I remember reading a report in the 1970s that it took 6 weeks to get a supermarket approved in America and 12 years in the UK. So I myself did 40 planning appeals. When I say I was a witness, in 40 planning appeals, each of which took about a year to get to the stage of having the appeal, and each one took a week. So it was extremely intense. As the rules had been loosened up to enable people to get planning permission for a business, we were able to open businesses when previously it wouldn't have been possible. So regulation is an extremely important part. So there's examples of very good regulation. Some people think there should be no regulation, all regulation is bad. That's not necessarily true. You can get good regulation. One of them is run by local authorities, and it's called Scores on the Doors. And you get marked out of 5 for your EHO, your environmental health standards. And it works very well because the guys at the coalface, the environmental health officers, know exactly what it is that they're doing. And it's not regulation which has come from on high, it's come from the grassroots. And we've done well at it. It's been, I don't mind saying, because it's good regulation, we just do what they say and work very hard. We have training courses, etc. And it works very well. And I think the licensing regulation as well is very well run. One example of bad regulation, it's run by the great and the good.
Yeah.
It's, I'll give you an example. Corporate governance regulation is run by, it's the opposite of grassroots, it's run by, I don't know who they are, Lord Gnome. Highly educated people in the city who think they understand business but actually know fuck all about it. I'll give you one example. They come out to try and avoid scandal, which we agree you should avoid, people running off with pension, whatever the hell it might be. We'd all be on all fours that would be a good thing to do. But they come out with rules that say the chairman should be non-executive. Well, I am the chairman. Yeah. I've always been the fucking chairman. And they say I should have been out in 1992 when our sales were 22 million. That's what the regulations say. So you've got people who vote against me on the board. And it's quite a scandal actually. But people, strangely enough, will accept regulations. So one of them, and I'll just bore you with one, is that non-executive directors, they should be in the majority, so they have tremendous power in companies. But they shouldn't be there for more than 9 years, so after 6 or 7 they go. So you haven't got a single director of a bank in the UK that was there in the last economic crisis when they all went bust. Now isn't that reassuring? Not one. It's crazy regulation, so it's tremendously important. So overall, I think that I've written down a few more things to talk about here, but I just mentioned a couple of points. I often think people think big jobs are where it's at, and you know, I'm really pleased if someone sets up Facebook in Exeter, where I live, magic. And so would you be pleased if there's an equivalent type company where you live. But at the same time, when I see people, and I'm going to mention them, but don't tell anyone. When I used to see David Cameron and George Osborne, who came from a privileged background, which I don't think there's anything wrong with at all, I thought, only they'd worked for us for a couple of years. They would have... You haven't been educated unless you walked into a pub with 600 people in Deansgate, Manchester on a Friday night and say, right, you lot off, out. And they say no. And you've got to clear the whole pub. So it's a tremendously good experience. I think don't just hope for the top jobs. Jobs in pubs, jobs in supermarkets, they're all important. And that's my 2 penneth worth, Ian.
I should say, by the way, that this is being streamed. I think my mother's watching. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Sorry, Ian.
Well, it's very difficult to follow that. I have to say I like a good bit of Anglo-Saxon and brilliant. You'll forgive me if I don't follow down the road of the F word, only because, anyway, I won't explain why. But the point is that, that I do agree with a lot of the use of it in this particular context. So, Tim, thank you very much. Thank you everybody else for having made your points. I was just trying to figure out how I would start what I was going to say, and I think what I'll do is just remind everybody what we, when I went to government, what we inherited in 2010. It's always worth setting the benchmark. When I walked in the door of the DLF in 2010, we had 1 in 5, 20% of all British households, nobody in work, nobody at all. When you think about that for a second, that's 1/5, 20% of all British households. Nobody went to work in the morning, nobody brought a paycheck home, they lost their pride, they began to lose their dignity, their children would have performed less well at school, their prospects in the future would have been damaged by that, and we were in the business of a spiral that could have become an intergenerational spiral unless we interrupted it and interrupted it fast. The second thing that was worth looking at was that that setup meant that within that there were over 1 million people in Britain who had been out of work for more than 1 year. Now there is a process about work and about being out of work. Most people are back in work when they lose a job within 6 months, 4, 5 months, 6 months. Then about 8, 9 months. Then if you're over that, your chances of getting work fall away dramatically. They fall away dramatically for every month after 6 that you are out of work. Why? Because you lose confidence, you have so many rejections, you don't manage it, it gets difficult to apply, it gets in a human sense very difficult to get up to go and do that because you fear that what's going to happen is you just won't get another job. So it's very, very tough. The longer you're out of work, the more difficult it becomes. And the interesting thing about there was over 1 million who had been long-term unemployed, and some of those had been unemployed for over 2 to 3 years and had completely got out of the habit of work. Now, I met a very interesting doctor who had set up, who was in a surgery in East London, and I remember he told me his surgery, he discovered, was full of, he was shipping out more antidepressants every year literally tons of them, and it was full of people sitting around talking, waiting to go in to see the doctor, all saying they were depressed, they were really not well, they started developing symptoms of things. And he came to the conclusion that it was because most of those people did not have any work. So he took one of his consultation rooms and he handed it over to one of the charities that actually, this is a point following up, sorry, Kamal's point, that actually specialised in getting people who had been out of work for a while into work. And he said within 12 months, so what his prescription then to somebody who's like that was go into that consultation room over there and work with them. And he found that after a year of that setup, his antidepressant bill had fallen by 60%. 60%. So when you ask me about the cost to the health service, it's right in this subject tonight. Because if people are unemployed for long periods of time, they will be less well. That depression then moves into physical illness, and the next thing you know is they're then eventually incapable of working or think of themselves as capable of working. So there is a moral purpose to employment. It's not just a feature of money. It is of course at the base to be able to earn money to live, but there's more than that. People who go work for the first time. I remember in one of the job centres meeting a young kid, he was 19, and he was struggling, and I remember that we talked a bit about it, and then I'll come back to this point because he gave me a particular idea, Chris Gleddy at the time, and we agreed to change. But while we were talking, his family had been out of work for some time, and therefore he was trying to get work, but he had no experience. About 9 months later, I happened to go back to the same job centre, and I remember the advisor was on there, and we got talking, and she said, "You remember that young guy that was in the office here that time and they were struggling?" I said, "Yeah." He said he got work in the end, and it was to do with the program that I'm going to talk about in a second. And then I said, "That's brilliant news." And he said, "You know what he did? He came back in to see me, and he said the proudest moment in his life was being able to take a bunch of flowers home on the first day that he had been in work to give to his mother because he had bought them with the money that he had earned." Now that was about something very, very internal to that individual. It wasn't just the money he earned, but the pride he had that now he wasn't beholden to somebody else giving him money not to work. He was now working for himself. So sometimes I think what bothers me about the other side in this particular experience is that they fail to recognize how important work really is to our sense of ourselves. So it's exactly as a result of that that I changed the rules at the DWP. So at that point, you could only do work experience for 2 weeks in a business. And so we sat down and changed it, and we said you could do work experience for up to 6 months if you wanted, and that if an extra 3 months, the business could apply for it. And we set that all up, and what was interesting about that program, it cost us absolutely nothing. We continued to pay benefits to somebody going on that, so the business didn't pay their salaries. The business got to look at them. We found that in that program, over 50% of the young kids who joined it went straight into work. About 70% of them went to work with that company that they joined. And we also found interesting that many of the companies that took them in, who had said to us they were only doing it because it was the right thing to do, but they didn't have any work for them, a whole load of them ended up taking the kids on. And what we discovered was something really interesting, which is, what that kid said to me, every time I go in front of an employer, they look at me and they say, "What experience you got?" And I say, "I haven't got any experience." They say, "Well, we can't take somebody on who hasn't got work experience." He said, "I can't get work experience unless you take me on." And he said, "Well, we can't give you the job because you haven't got work experience." And he said, time after time after time, he couldn't get a job. The moment we set up the work experience program, the work program for young people, it changed all that, because what happened is it allowed two things. First of all, the young kid got to discover what being in work was all about. Very basic work skills aren't always technological. They aren't always 5 GCSEs. They are the knowledge that when you go to work, You turn up at the set time that you're meant to be there. You work for the hours that they ask you to work. You do all they ask you to do, and then you leave not before the time that you're meant to leave, and you make sure, therefore, your day is planned around that work. Now, believe it or not, for young kids growing up in households where no one's had any work, and where they themselves have never had work, that sometimes takes 2 weeks or more for them to realize that there is a logical and practical process. That is the most basic experience for work that you can ever have. Most people in this room probably take it for granted, but it is a very big change for them, and it's a big change. And the second thing that we found about the program was really interesting, was that the employers who said that they hadn't got a job for them, once these young boys and girls had settled in the work, they became so enthusiastic with what they were doing, they worked so hard, that they decided to create jobs around the individual. So for having said the young kids don't want work, they won't all work, which is what the thing that the companies kept saying to us, by the end of it they were saying exactly the opposite. They realized actually that they had undervalued somebody who just needed a chance and a shot at it, and they were going to do well. So that process told me a lot, and that's why we set up the work program, which was mostly by the private sector, aimed at the longest term unemployed. We eventually had to close it down because we did not have enough long-term unemployed to fuel it, which brought the money to it. So long-term unemployed went right down during that period, as did all unemployment. So the question here, against the backdrop, is that we moved a long, long way from 2008-9, where hope had gone out the window for many people. We now seem to have established the very base principle, which is the biggest way out of poverty is a job. Getting a job is critical. So let me just look at some of the issues then that the others have talked about, which is true. I think in this country, we did some work on this the other day in what I call a productivity report. You'll remember this because you were the secretariat to the report. But the main point that really struck me was, we asked a simple question, does the UK have a productivity problem? So can we blame it on the fact that basically we can't make stuff efficiently as everybody else? We came to the very simple conclusion of the fact that we don't have a productivity problem because London and the South East have the highest productivity rating in the whole of Europe. Now it's a rotten measure, by the way, because it measures mostly widgets and things and doesn't do very much for the service sector at all, and literally would leave something like Tim's business very imponderable, whereas I think it's hugely productive, but on the way that you've got too many employees, they'll say to you, therefore you're not as productive as you should. But without enough employees, he doesn't have a smooth business, and customers don't get served, and that's really another way. So we have to find another way of measuring. But under that measurement, London and the South East had the highest in Europe. What was really interesting was the rest of the UK did not meet the average for the UK. So our problem, therefore, begins to become apparent in employment, and this fits with the figures that you were just giving out, Patrick, a second ago. The problem we have is that beyond London and the South East, where we are dominated by in this country, the level of skilling of enterprise has been, we've failed to support it, both as government and also in industry. So here's a startling figure that I think really you can sear it into your heart. Of all those who start entry-level work in the United Kingdom, only 15% will ever rise beyond entry-level work for the rest of their lives. Only 15%. It is one of the lowest figures for job and skills mobility in the whole world. Our problem isn't productivity, our problem is that those who want work and enter work are being prepared in the wrong way in many cases for work. I personally think we are over-obsessed with university education in this country to a massive degree, and that has meant that we have taken our eye off the ball of some of the other areas that are really vital. We talk about apprenticeships, but we spent nothing, next to nothing, on the FE colleges that are the huge link to apprenticeship training and to upskilling from entry-level work. You know, businesses like Tim's and other might be able to say, you know, onward progression for this individual requires certain training, we can get a course going at an FE college, they'll help, we'll do the rest practically or whatever. In many places they can't do that because the FE colleges can't meet that and match that. result is, if they're not doing it internally at all, as has happened, as you know, investment in training amongst many businesses has literally almost frozen up. That's a big issue. So training and skilling, I'm not talking about brilliant computers, I'm just talking about some of the basic on-progression training that would actually help the productivity of that company, because those individuals with newer and sharper skills will be able to help develop their businesses and make them better. So the training and skilling end of it is an enormous, enormous feature, because we have to be able to make that progression. And then there's all the other stuff that is needed, both from industry and government. Government, what can they do about it? Stop all these great sounding programs and start spending some of the money that we're about to spend on all sorts of vanity projects, I think, on very simple things like getting proper broadband into towns and cities and into the country, so that people can run their businesses where they want to run them and not have to find that they're unable to compete with anybody because they don't have the communications. Make sure that the roads are linked properly and the railways work in these areas so that people can ship goods, bring in goods, can get their stuff on time and don't get them bogged down having to get through terrible towns and cities. Little bypasses, for example. You know, look at the North and the Midlands. We should be investing, as Boris wants to do, much more now in developing the infrastructure in those areas so that businesses can ship their goods quickly and not be worrying too much about the rest of this. And I come back to Side's point about computer sciences. The truth is, people need base skills to get moving, and that is the key element of it. And the number one thing I think we can do is to ensure, therefore, that we rebalance what I call the education system in the UK. Teachers, schools and parents have got to recognise there are other ways that people can live and work. People who go in on an apprenticeship programme, on an engineering apprenticeship programme, can later on develop and take a degree. Maybe they already start work, earning money. They don't come back with debts on university education, but they get to the same route on a different way. They learn work early. So I think the whole culture here in the UK has got to be one where we really, really value our workforce that we have, that we ensure that we as companies invest in their onward progression and training, and that the government backs that up by making sure there are proper and serious, generous tax relief for companies that genuinely invest in training, and make sure all those support programs are around them, as I said earlier on, the proper programs around roads and railways, proper superfast broadband, all those things that Boris was just going to be talking about should have been rolled out years and years ago. We've got to do it now. If we want to turn this around, we've got to make the whole of the UK, not just London and the South East, really, really genuinely open for business.
I will open this panel up to questions in a minute, but I'm going to take the chance to ask a few questions myself. I want to start on the subject of FE. There is near universal acceptance that we've got FE wrong in this country. There's near universal acceptance that we've probably got to spend more on vocational training. Syed, my first question to you is, apart from signing a massive check, how do we break open the college system in this country? How do we get more people accessing vocational training and going the non-university route?
I suspect there are a number of different answers, but let me try one or two. So the first one, I think, is going back to Ian's point about the idea of how many people are going to university in this country, where the resources are going there. And you know, I mean, what's happened with, first of all, the polytechnics conversion to universities, and second, the fact that we are just, you know, I think both Labour and Conservative are guilty of this. I don't think we can blame each other. We wanted to increase the number of people who go to university. I think both parties aimed at 1 in 3, then 1 in 2, without thinking the consequences of that. And actually, we rebalanced that and made FE more attractive. And with the politics having gone, what you actually find in many ways is that the FE sector is taking up much of that technical training that the polytechnics used to offer. Because the polytechnics have moved away, and they want to offer degree courses. Now, some of them are coming back because they've now got a market. They've got to attract more students, you know, paying their fees. What you're starting to find with the universities is alternative pathways. For example, alternative pathways to engineering. And I think some of the FE colleges also looking to do that as well in partnership with some universities. So, for example, you don't need to have 2 or 3 A's to go to university. You can can start off with a lower qualification or a pre-foundation course, then a foundation course, and then get onto a degree. Some of the universities are now also looking at something called an apprenticeship degree. So it's a longer degree, a bit like what Ian was saying. You start work, you start earning at a lower level, and eventually, not after 3 years, maybe 6 years, 7 years, you get your degree, but you've actually got all that experience of work. And I think if we look at that, some of that will be the universities, and they'll specialise in that way. It doesn't matter whether they're called FE or universities, if that's a pathway. And some of them will actually be the FE colleges, because you see some of the FE colleges now trying to also offer that alternative pathway, and I think you'll see an overlap between the two. I think the other thing actually is I want to see more short courses. Not me personally, it shouldn't be me determining it or a politician determining it, but in response to what companies are asking. And if employers are actually driving these courses, and they say actually, we can have people, it could be NEETs, it could be others, that we can have people who are trained up to get to the level that we require in 6 weeks or 8 weeks that they come in. But that's an alternative rather than saying, is it university, and we're labelling it. We've got to be far more flexible. One of the things about teaching in general, and I lecture once a week at a university, in some ways technology hasn't changed very much, despite the technology out there changing. You still have a lecturer in front of a classroom. It might not be a chalkboard anymore with a board duster. I might have less chalk on my tweed jacket and my leather patches. But in some ways, the way we teach now, when you've got communications technology, for example, and you've got and you've got YouTube, and you've got some of these other courses. There are different ways of doing this, and it doesn't have to be a physical institution. There could be more network learning, so you are all online. You might be actually physically in different places, but you feel connected to your fellow students, and you have an interactive session with your tutor, and that can be a much lower cost, much different way of doing it, rather than actually having to shift to a building and all the costs that entails. So I think we've got to be careful about, is it FE, is it university, is it something else? I think we've got to look at a system that encompasses all these technologies.
Thank you. Maria, I read in your report recently that actually there's a trend with apprenticeships, and I believe it's with FE as well, where not only is it that lower attainment students end up going into apprenticeships, but also lower attainment from more advantaged, so non-disadvantaged families. So exactly the kind of people we're trying to support getting into the labour market. Not only are they cornered out of the university system, they're not the apprenticeship. Is that true? Is this a problem? How do we approach it?
So the problem with both routes, the technical route and the higher education route, is access. And for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, so those on free school meals, they're disproportionately more likely to leave education at 16 without their English and Maths GCSE. Now those two GCSEs are the entry-level requirements, not only for A-levels, but for T-levels, for a lot of apprenticeships. And you can't gain an apprenticeship at level 2 without having those qualifications. So the best thing we can do for disadvantaged young people is make education work to ensure that everybody gets those basic minimum standards of GCSEs to enable them to access either route. And then I think we need to get away a little bit from this either-or dichotomy between FE and HE. A lot of universities are delivering vocational and technical training. A lot of FE colleges are delivering degrees. And it's about giving young people the support to understand what's best for them. Do they want to be learning while working at the same time? Do they have more academic bent? And it should be purely those kinds of issues that are helping young people to decide. And it shouldn't have anything to do with their economic background, with the income of their parents, with the cultural fabric around them. It should be purely about what's best for them.
Okay. One of the things that I also read in your report is also the fact that when you control for educational attainment, one of the biggest predictors of an individual's probability of finding themselves in need is family disadvantage. And surely, instead of, education is important, but actually tackling disadvantage in the household is probably where money is better spent. Yes or no?
So I'm pleased you asked me about the family. So about 15% of young people in this country are on free school meals. And if we were to look at the types of families that those young people are growing up in, a very small proportion of those families are what the government calls troubled families, and they're families with multiple complex problems. Abuse, it could be history of offending. Very often those parents have suffered trauma that hasn't been addressed, and there are some very good early interventions, multi-systemic therapy. There's people in the audience I know who run these kinds of programs that have evidence of working with those families, and the thing to understand about those programs is it's long-term intense work, and they're worth investing in because the payoff is huge if we get it right with those families. But the vast majority of young people on free school meals are growing up in families which are simply time poor and resource poor. And so they don't, while they want the best for those young people are not getting the kind of support. Like we saw a report last week from the Sutton Trust saying 40% of kids are now getting tuition. A lot of these kids are not even getting support with their homework. So some of the things that we do at Impetus is we support charities that give free tuition to young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. We support charities that open centres in those communities to help young people develop aspirations around going to university and apprenticeships, like into university. So it's, for us, it's about targeting the right support of the young people that need it.
Do you think the government should do more early intervention?
Absolutely. Early intervention is one of the most cost-effective things you can do to affect positive social outcomes. The long-term benefits and long-term cost savings are enormous. It's a no-brainer.
No-brainer. Okay. Tim, so I asked a question at the beginning. What do you need from the government to employ one more person?
It's very difficult to be dissected, but I think that if you're talking about the pub trade, this is the random nature of law and regulation. The pub trade, as I've said, is a very high generator of jobs and a very high generator of taxes. But a lot of pubs have shut down. And one of the reasons is, for no good reason that anyone really understands, is pubs are taxed much more heavily than supermarkets. And so if we had tax equality in supermarkets, which we've campaigned for years, that the whole of the pub sector would generate a lot more jobs, which wouldn't matter so much in Notting Hill or Solihull, but it would make a big difference, particularly on high streets in the less wealthy areas in the country, where the difference between a pint going out or a coffee going out and staying in and buying from the supermarket is more important. So tax equality, but it would just be one of the 100 things one could mention. You can think of some things as well.
I'd like to open it up to the floor. So if anybody's got a question, can I have it at one point? Can I implore those people asking questions to be as succinct as possible? I know it's a conference and you get people going on for a while, but if we can make it to the point, that would be fantastic. Gentleman at the back with your hand raised. If you can give us your name as well, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Chris. I employ people as well. A lot of what was said resonated with me, absolutely. But my question is this. Schools still put young people, and I employ a lot of them in my business, under pressure to go to university. I didn't go to university. I started at 16, pushing trolleys in the car park at Waitrose and Partners. Now I run one of their shops 20 odd years later. And I say to them, you don't need to go to university to get a good job. But they still are getting this message. And that is what needs to change. So much of what's been said, as I say, resonates with me, but that message is not getting through. And children and young people, 16, 17, 18, believe they have to go to university, and I see it all the time. I employ them at 16, they go to university, they get lots of debt, I still employ them when they're 21, when they've left university, and then they start doing the management training scheme in my business or whatever else we get to do. Not all of them, some of them, and they don't need to go to university unless they want to be a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher or something like that. Yeah, that's fine. They need to go and get a degree. They don't need to work, as you say, and get skills in work. So that's my question. And what can we do about that?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Well, I was agreeing with him. I think one of the problems that we've got, slightly, or maybe not be, it's not that there's a dichotomy between whether you go to university or whether you go into apprenticeships or FE. I think the issue is more that too many young people find themselves